Thank you. I can't read it. 7.1. Proponent. Okay. All right. Yep. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Planning and Development Committee meeting. I'll deal with the recording and webcasting of the meeting. This committee meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at this committee meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this committee meeting, that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this committee meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations. I have received one from the Mayor, Councillor Mack, with reference to item number Planning and Development Committee Agenda Item 7.1, the 64 contributions. The Mayor knows the proponent and he intends to leave the chamber. I'm not aware of any others. We'll ask the General Manager to read the declaration on disclosures of political donations. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This advice to the Planning Development Committee relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Section 147 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Accordingly, the provisions of 79C1 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's reports, detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put to a meeting of the Council or a Council committee. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of Council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan, or a development contributions plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 2A of Part 6 of that Act. Matters appearing in the Planning Development Committee meeting minutes will require a planning decision to be made, will be dealt with separately and immediately following the motion for the adoption of the Planning Development Committee meeting minutes. In respect of these matters, motions for a planning decision put before Council will be considered a division and recorded in accordance with Section 375A of the Local Government Act. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll now move to apologies. Item 3 on the agenda. We have one apology as made known to us. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move committee receive, note and accept the apology of Councillor Stutchbury and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Noting that apology, I'll put that to the committee. All those in favour? Anyone against? That motion is carried. We'll now move to the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 11th of December. Councillor Mack.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to move the minutes of the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on Monday, the 11th of December 2017 at 6 p.m. be confirmed. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Ven.
Happy to second that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Van der Ven. There's no indication of any questions, so I'll put those minutes to the committee. All those in favour? Anyone against? That motion is carried. Just check if there's any matters arising from the minutes, councillors. There being no indication, we'll move on to the next item, which is minutes of committees and working parties. There are none. We'll move on to item 7. There are 2 items tonight, both of which we will need to have divisions for. The first one, item 7.1, the section 64 contributions for a proposed home beauty salon at 117 Johnson Road, West Albury. Councillor Mack is leaving the room. Thank you. Councillor Van der Ven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move a slightly different motion to the one that's on the board. One, receive and note the report regarding Section 64 contribution for a proposed home beauty salon at 117 Johnson Road, West Albury. B, levy a reduced Section 64 developer charge of $500 per basin. And C, request council staff to bring forward a report to council within 3 months regarding the levying of developer contribution charges to new and existing or new and proposed home businesses. If I can get a second, I'm happy to speak to it.
Just wait until we have that.
C was bring forward a report to council within 3 months about the future of developer contributions for home businesses, existing and new.
Businesses. Thank you. Councillor Van der Ven, is that your intended motion?
For a policy regarding developer contributions. So just to add 3 words there, for a policy regarding developer contributions for home businesses. Yeah, that would suffice for my purposes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Van der Ven. Looking for a seconder. Councillor King, you'd like to second that, would you?
I'd like to second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no indication of any questions, so we'll move over to Councillor Van der Ven. I'll just check first with the General Manager that we're happy with that recommendation. Yep. Okay. Councillor Van der Ven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I've read this report very closely, and I personally think that the numbers are somewhere in between what the proponent's claiming and what the council are suggesting might be the actual. If you take the extreme, and that is the issue around the fact that the business is going to be open for 25 hours a week for 40 weeks, and you assume that you use the council's figures for water usage per treatment, allowing for some treatments that don't use water, of let's say 5.7, we'll call it 6 litres per treatment. We're looking at around about 150 litres per week of water usage. Now, if we then allow for, well, let's say we've got some really good washing machines around now that are really efficient. If we allow $50 or 50 litres per day for washing machine usage for all of the stuff that she uses, we're talking around about 400 litres per week. And if we extrapolate that out to a yearly usage, we're talking around about the 400 times 40, which is about 16,000 litres, which is around about, rough estimates, around about 12 to 15% of what the average tenement users. Now, noting that the developer contributions for this block originally would have been already paid, and I don't know how long ago and how much it would have been, but I'm got a feeling that we can monitor the water usage for this, and I know it'll be too late to do anything different with this particular property. But we can sort of try and get a handle on, where is the true figure about the extra water usage that this business or this home business or proposed home business might use in the future. We don't have a policy around these sorts of issues, and I note that Council's report, also clearly was suggesting that we report a reduced contribution of 50% on the basis that we really want to encourage businesses. Well, I think that 50% of that fee is over the top from my perspective, as far as on the basis of even allowing for council's estimate of the usage. So I've come up with a figure of around about 1/8 of the developer contributions, or roughly of that nature, as what would be a fair. I don't think we should be looking to try and provide a zero outcome here, because I don't for 1 minute believe that the proponents' figures are going to be anywhere near the mark. I reckon, as I said early, I think it's somewhere in between the two. But obviously, if we were to perhaps ask council staff in 12 months' time on the basis of what has been the water usage of this property compared to the average over the last 10 years, I'm sure they could provide that information on the basis of percentage basis, not on actual usage, because I don't really want to know, but on a percentage basis. I think it'll give us some idea of how close to the mark we were, or council was, or the proponent was. So on the basis of, yes, we need to encourage these home businesses, we need to be having a charge for these, because it is different to what was originally proposed for this residential property, but we also need to be encouraging business. So on that basis, I would, request my fellow councillors to look on this motion favourably and support it, and look forward to getting a report from council in 3 months' time about developing a policy around these developer contributions for home businesses. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor van der Ven. We have one speaker against and another speaker for. I'm just checking. I also had some questions about the original motion, so I'm just checking whether or not they apply here. What I might do is, I know it's unusual for the chair to ask questions so early on, but I will ask these questions now because it might help other councillors. I'm not sure, but it'll certainly help me. So questions to the staff, Mr. General Manager, if I may. I had 4 questions, and I'm happy just to ask all of them and then get a general response to them, if I may, Mr. Keys. Thank you. And it was based on the 50% previously, so if either 50% were to be agreed or the $500 base levy, then how would it be monitored for compliance? How would we know that only half the use, or now 1/8, I think it is, Councillor van der Ven, would be utilised? And how might the creeping increase, or how might any potential creeping increase be dealt with? What if the suggested hours of operation were actually increased? How would that then be dealt with? And how would the approval be controlled for future use, either that the salon grows over the 50%, not a creeping 50%, but an actual over the 50% or the 1/8? And what if the house was to be sold on with an approval for what was planned to be the 50%, that would now be 1/8%, 1/8 of the total component? How would that be dealt with in the future as well?
Can I answer one of them, Madam Chair?
I think the General Manager indicated Mr. Keys to answer them, but
I'm happy to answer one of them if you're prepared to listen to my answer.
You will be able to speak later, Councillor Van der Ven, in summing up. And yep, okay. Mr. Keys.
Through you, Madam Chair, to try and cover it off, one of the reasons we put forward the suggested figure of a 50% reduction was based on the potential hours of use of this beauty salon compared to a normal beauty salon. The proponents requested those hours of operation, and that would be the basis of any control on the business. The precise customer services that are provided in those times, in those hours, would not be monitored by council. It is the hours of operation that we've tried to rely on, and obviously different services that are offered will provide different demands and impacts on the water consumption and hence the demand on the infrastructure. Now, given that, we've tried to use the comparison to an existing beauty salon elsewhere in the city, particularly in the commercial business, and the hours of operation that would normally operate in those facilities versus what's proposed here, and that's how we've come up with the 50%. So in terms of monitoring in the future, it would strictly relate to the hours of operation. If they were changed or were to be changed or sought to be changed, then there would be a further consideration of the potential impacts. In regards to the services that are offered during those hours and the impacts on the use, we've tried to use an average and that's the best we can do. And it's a bit similar to what happens in a normal household where we have infrastructure contributions that are averaged across the city rather than in specific circumstances where you can't control, where one household may have 2 people in it and another household may have up to 8 or 10, depending on the family circumstances, and hence demand changes over the life cycle of a property as well. I hope that helps in some way to explain why we've come up with the figure we have.
Okay, and if I may, Mr. Keys, with regards to the potential for the property to be sold on, what would then happen with this approval and the fee that has been paid?
Through you, Madam Chair, the approval sticks with the property and those provisions. If the next person who owns the property or may take up a lease or whatever comes along, they're entitled to activate and operate within the parameters of that approval. If they wanted to operate outside of that, again, we would have to consider an amendment to either a modification of the development consent or a new application. And again, the potential impact on our infrastructure would be considered at that time. There is no reduction or repayment of the contributions in the future if they choose not to proceed or future owners come in and don't take that offer up. However, if there was potential to expand, then any credits that have already or any payments that have already been made, contributions made, would be taken into fully taken into account.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Con wishing to speak against. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I did want to strongly agree with Section C. I acknowledge that we are going to need a policy to deal with this, and I commend that section of the motion. Unfortunately, I think that we're going to set a really problematic precedent if the number that we set as a fee tonight is not clearly derived by some kind of process. And I acknowledge that the staff have used the hours of operation to calculate 50% as an appropriate amount. Home businesses are becoming more common throughout Albury. I think that diversity is great for the city, but we need to be careful how we manage it. And I think it's problematic if we go into writing this policy where we've set a precedent of 500 per basin relatively arbitrarily, that it's, the next person is going to come along and request the same amount, even if our new policy is well above that. I've seen it happen with a laundromat issue about a year and a half ago, where the council is now, waiving fees for new laundromats because of a historical precedent. So I think we need to be really careful about how we go about this one. It needs to be done using a process which the staff have done to arrive at this figure that we can defend and apply again in the future. So I'd like to foreshadow that if this motion is lost, I'll be moving an alternate motion that will be the original recommendation from staff, and I'm happy to include Councillor Van der Ven's Part C as well.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Councillor King to speak for this recommendation from Councillor Van der Ven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm voting for the motion of Councillor Van der Ven. Weirdly, his exact thoughts were my exact thoughts in regards to home business. I'd just like to make a point, though, that
we're having basically a council meeting about this decision of a basin in a residential house, and the planning department has a delegation of $50 million to approve items without coming to council, and the stuff that we get is in regards to reduction of a contribution for a basin in a home-based hairdressing salon. Now, I also would like to talk about home-based businesses. I think they are the backbone of a lot of businesses that have started up and gone bigger. Lindsay Fox is a classic example of having one truck based at his home in Windsor in Melbourne, and now he has the largest fleet in Australia. We should support home-based businesses. We should support small business. I actually thought of having a zero contribution, and that the council have a tiered policy, that the businesses like the applicants should come in tier 1, and then there should be other things for tier 2 and tier 3, and these things shouldn't have to come to us to make a decision. I have taken on board Councillor Vanderven's $500 fee, and he's convinced me that should be a reasonable figure. If we start charging exorbitant amounts like $5,000 to put a basin in, you're going to get two things out of it. You're going to get people that aren't going to start businesses because the cost to set up is ludicrous, and using 200 mils to wash someone's hair and pay $5,000 is going to stop it. Or you're going to get people who are just going to set it up, not come to the council, and have these operations that aren't conforming to our regulations. So, in saying that, I'm for the motion put forward by Councillor Vanderven.
Madam Chair, can I make a small amendment to the motion? If
You have a question.
well,
Councillor
yeah,
Vanderven.
but that was there to try and get your attention so I can move a small amendment. So, to item
Councillor
B, levy a reduced Section 64 development contribution charge of $500 per basin for this property only. That's one change. And B, bring forward a report to council in 3 months for policy regarding et cetera, for home businesses existing and new for future, for the future. So basically what I'm trying to do with the motion, if the Councillor King's happy to second it, is to not set a precedent by having this as a one-off developer contribution charge for this particular property only, and then we can have a policy around this for the future, home businesses that come up. If Councillor King's happy with that, I'll just make that amendment.
Councillor King. Sorry, Councillor King.
I'm happy with that.
Thank you. Just get that those changes made.
So it's any new future business.
Okay, so we've had those changes, and Councillor King has accepted the modification by Councillor Vanderven. I would like to ask another question, if I may, Mr. General Manager, through you to the most relevant member of staff, with reference to a comment made by Councillor King with regards to why this has been brought to council for determination in this instance. Mr. Zachnich.
Thank you. Yes, certainly the staff have no delegation to waive contribution fees or charges. That is wholly and solely a matter for council. So that's why it comes to council, notwithstanding Councillor King's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. Councillor Doxey, you have a question, and then Councillor Thurley wishes to speak against. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the appropriate member of staff, the issues for me in this particular case are, it is a room, as I understand it, in a house, in a residential property. Are we able to monitor if there is an increase in the, for example, increase in the business? If the business is a very successful business, is there likely to, could there be an increase, and does that affect any contributions as we set it tonight, perhaps? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr Keys.
Through you, Madam Chair, the recommendation that's been made is to try and find the most reasonable and practical way of trying to ascertain a charge. Apart from having a specific monitor or somebody go out and read the meter, asked to review the books and review the books for all appointments made, and to review that business on a quarterly basis, which would be extremely onerous both on the business but also council staff, for a relatively minimal gain. The figures that have been provided and that are used are based on averages that have been calculated across the state. So this is from the New South Wales Water Directorate guidelines that form the initial basis of any charge. These haven't been developed overnight. They were developed over an extended period, which involved a lot of review, revision, both business, community and councils, as well as water supply authorities' input over a long period of time, and that's where the calculations have been based on. We've then translated that across to try and come up with a practical application that reflects and allows for growth, but also allows for the variables in a business operation without trying to be too onerous or over the top. And that's where we've come up with the reasoning around the 50% based on the hours that are of operation. That enables the business to grow, to operate at maximum capacity, but also if it's not operating at maximum capacity, still allow for some charge that reflects the additional burden on our infrastructure from a home business operating in a local area.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr Keys. Councillor Thurley to speak against.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My arguments are pretty much along the same lines as Councillor Con. The numbers that were given by the proponent to me just do not stack up. 25 hours a week and only 3 clients. And a very small water use. None of that seems to stack up at all to me. And in fact, in his opening address, Councillor Vanderven used other numbers which probably are more realistic. The problem I still have with this motion is that item B says for this property only, and that's an attempt to say we're not setting a precedent, but we have. We've given one business one free kick or one help, and every other business should be entitled to expect the same. So we are setting a precedent no matter what we do. As Councillor Connor said, the staff report was based on analysis of the state figures, of figures that come and council is required to use in all circumstances, and then they applied a 50% discount. And I believe that that is appropriate. I don't believe we're discouraging home-based businesses. All businesses, and we've had discussions, as Councillor Con mentioned, about a laundromat that wanted certain things, and we've had other people then immediately come back to us and say, well, we want that too. I think the council report was thorough, detailed, and I would prefer, if this motion fails, that we go back to the original with the addition of point C. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There's no further speakers for this motion. However, I wish to speak against Councillor Vanderven and Councillor King's motion. Whilst I am a small business myself and do support small business and I'm an active member in the Chambers of Commerce, etc., we as small businesses or large businesses all have to pay fees and charges and levies. They're there for a reason. And if I can use a couple of examples, if we look at the workers' compensation premium that I pay annually, there's an annual charge for dust and asbestos that I have to pay because we all have to pay that across the state. My staff are not subject to those problems, but I still have to be insured against them because we are insuring against for workers across the state. We've also heard from Mr Keys tonight that the Section 64 contribution for development applications for housing It doesn't matter whether there are 2 or 4 occupants intended per house, or whether someone has 2 people living it and sells it on to 4 people and then sells it on to 6 people, a family of 6. That house still pays the same development application and the same Section 64 charge. I, like Councillor Con and Councillor Thurley, think it would be inequitable not to charge at least the 50% contribution, as was the recommendation by the staff, who have spent considerable time looking into this matter for us. I believe that is more equitable, and whilst it's not the full amount, it does provide some assurance to our other small businesses who don't necessarily operate from home, but other small businesses, that we are being equitable in the fees and charges that we are levying. So I cannot support this recommendation from Councillor Van der Ven and Councillor King, and would indeed support the suggested motion by Councillor Con. Councillor Van der Ven, there's no further indication of any questions, so would you like to close debate?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I will. Look, there's a couple of points that I would like to make in response to some of the comments that councillors that have spoken against this. With regards to the fact that this is setting a precedent, well, possibly, but the fact remains that we don't have a policy around this. And the motion attempts to provide some certainty around this for the future by having a policy regarding these developer contributions. As regards the how are you going to pay for this if the business grows? Well, the fact remains that the person still pays rates on water usage and the accompanying sewer usage. So any increase in water charges will be reflected in the water bill that person has to pay. Now, my suggestion would be that this house would have possibly, with 2 toilets, possibly at least 4 basins, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the laundry, and 2 in both bathrooms. It says dual bathrooms, and we're adding 1 to it. My goodness, very little as far as usage is concerned. And whilst I understand that, and I did make the comment that I don't believe for 1 minute the proponents' figures as being anywhere near what might happen, I would hesitate to suggest that if you're trying to set up a business for 24 hours a week and you're expecting 3 clients, I'm not sure why you're bothering. But the fact remains that I've tried to come up with a figure that's somewhere in between what council is approving as a maximum usage and what might be a reasonable expectation for a small home-based business to have as far as clients is concerned. And even if it's at the maximum, I've already proven that even allowing for maximum water usage per wash and maximum water usage as per council's figures, that there will not be an extra imposition of more than about 20,000 litres per year, which will be reflected in their water charges anyhow. So I think that from my perspective, all the bases are covered as far as not setting a precedent, getting the money for extra usage of the infrastructure, and any developer charge is a once-only charge. I mean, somebody that had built a house 60 years ago might have paid, £3 for a developer charge, and there could be 8 people living in that house. Are we going to go back and say, oh, you only got to develop a charge for 2 people living in that house, or there's now 6 people? We're going to increase that. I mean, that's a long, bow to draw. But I'm just pointing out that I think that in the interim, the fact that we don't have a policy, we're going to recover the usage charges from extra usage fees, like $1.88 a litre or whatever the current figure is. And then we set the policy for the future. And I think that this is a very reasonable motion in these circumstances. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Van der Ven. Councillors, having closed debate, having had the debate closed, I'll now put this motion, this recommendation to Council, noting it is different from that as recommended by the staff, A, B and C. All those in favour, and please note that we do need to record the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Van der Ven and Councillor King. Anyone against? Councillors Doxey, Glacken, Con and Thurley. That motion is lost. Alex, you have it? Yep. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would like to move an alternate motion that keeps Part A as written. Part B should read levy a reduced Section 64 developer charge of $2,460.48 per basin, and that leaves Part C as per the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you. You don't want to reword C.
2,400.
Okay. As per the figure as per the original. Yes. So it's only B that changes. Is that correct? And yes, councillors, just for reference, it's the middle A, B and C that we're looking at. Councillor Con is happy with that. Councillor Thurley, you'd
Second
like
the motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And the staff are happy? Yep, right. So Councillor Con, would you like to speak to this motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be really brief, as I already spoke to it really in the previous motion. I think a 50% reduction in fees is a fair and reasonable thing to do to support a home business. We're acknowledging that it's not a full-size salon. We're acknowledging that it's going to be operating for reduced hours, and we're offering a fair discount in the interim while we come up with a policy.
Thank you, Councillor Con. There's no one wishing to ask any questions or speak against. So I'll ask Councillor Con if she's happy if I put that. I'll need to record the votes. All those in favour? Councillors Thurley, Con, Glacken and Doxey. Anyone against? Councillors Van der Ven and Councillor King. That motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move to item 7.2, Albury Development Control Plan 2010, review of development notification provisions. Yep. Thank you. Just to confirm, the Mayor, Councillor Mack, has returned to the chamber. And we're dealing, Councillor Mack, with item 7.2, Albury Development Control Plan 2010. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, we have the recommendation from the staff on page 22, A, B and C. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to move the recommendation that the committee A, receive and note the contents of the report, B, prepare and publicly exhibit the draft development notification provisions as included in attachment 1, and C, should no objections be received during the public exhibition period, then the proposed amendment be finalised without further report to council.
Okay, Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. There's no indication of any questions or anyone wishing to speak against at the moment. Councillor Con, would you have a question? Okay, and then Councillor Van der Ven. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to the relevant member of staff, please. My question is regarding the proposed amendment that all notifiable applications, as opposed to all applications, are advertised. I just was wondering what the difference is between a notifiable application.
Mr Keys?
Through you, Madam Chair, in our existing provisions, we identify development that's notifiable. It's defined that those that likely have an impact, as well as certain categories. We've then got others that are not notified to adjoining neighbours because they're relatively small and minor, inconsequential and unlikely to generate any interest. And we had a previous report up to Council in regards to that approximately, I think, about 2 years ago in regards to those changes. And that's all this is clarifying, that instead of having to pay for an ad to go in the paper for something we wouldn't notify, we're not going through that process.
Councillor Con? Yeah. Councillor van der Ven, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly under item B, will the changes be to the draft or to the development notifications provisions be highlighted so people are quite clear as to what is actually being changed?
Mr Keys?
Through you, Madam Chair, that would certainly be the intention, that there was specific reference and direct reference to what's being changed, as well as trying to provide some additional information around what those changes or the implications of those changes are. We'll provide that on our website and also provide that to anyone who makes inquiries.
Yes, Councillor van der Ven.
Just to follow up on item C, thanks for that answer. Through you to the relevant member of staff, should no objections be received during the public notification period, then the proposed amendment be finalised without further report. Is that a normal process? Because I don't... Okay, yes. Thank you.
Mr Zachnich.
Yes, that is the case. We've exercised that in a number of situations.
There's no indication of any further questions, so Councillor Con.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, following that explanation from Mr Keys and my thorough reading of this change, which I somewhat regret the half an hour of my life I can't get back, I am inclined to agree with staff that the changes proposed are really quite minor wording changes, and I have no problem with it.
Thank you. And Councillor Con, I'll assume you've closed debate as well. Thank you very much. I'll put this recommendation to Council. Council, please note that, to the committee. Committee, please note that we do need to record this vote because it is about a development provision. All those in favour? Councillors Doxey, Glacken, Con, King, Mack, Thurley and van der Ven. Anyone against? There is no councillor against. That motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move to item 8 on the agenda, the Economic Indicators 2017 update. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recommend that the committee recommends to Council that Council receive and note the Albury Economic Indicators December 2017 release.
Sorry, I'm just looking. Right. Yes, thank you. Councillor van der Ven. I was on the wrong page.
Happy to second that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor van der Ven. Councillor Doxey, would you like to speak to this? There's no indication of any questions.
I think, Madam Chair, that the report is well presented and it has all the detail we need. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Councillor van der Ven wishing to speak for?
Only just briefly, Madam Chair, I think that this particular report shows that the economic activity in our region, our city and our twin cities is going very well. And I highlight some of the interesting increases, one of which was the number of people with a tertiary education had grown by something like 30%. And I think that that's a really interesting part of our profile now that, we seem to be attracting people with that higher education and into our area and hopefully our labour force. So, but I think that all of the economic indicators are in a positive light and show that the economy of Albury and Wodonga is pretty strong.
Thank you, Councillor van der Ven. Councillor Doxey, would you like to close debate or are you happy with that?
I'm happy with closing.
Okay, thank you. I will now put that recommendation to the committee with regards to the Economic Indicators 2017 update report. All those in favour? Anyone against? That motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We have no reports for noting, delegates' reports for noting. We have no notice of urgent business unless a councillor were to make me aware of one now. And we have no confidential matters, so I will now close the meeting. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. Thank you. I'm done. Do you want your water glass?
No.
I used it.
Councillor Doxey's left the room. Is he not interested in this meeting, or
He's tending to an operation.
okay? I shall wait.
You don't have to.
I can.
It is
I
the
will.
appointed time
It is not. There was no appointed time.
immediately after the
Well, it's sort of immediately after, even I wait for a minute.
cameras roll.
Good. Where's my website thing? That one. That one.
Committee set.
Oh, I'll get this over with, well, councillor.
Yeah, please do.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and councillors and staff and media and other council staff. I'll just open the Engineering and Works Committee meeting and note that this committee meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the committee meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this committee meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this committee meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. We'll move on to conflict of interest declarations. I haven't received any. AWC 3, apologies. We have one apology, I believe. Councillor Thurley.
Move the committee receive, note and accept the apology of Councillor Stutchbury and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Chair.
Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Item EWC 4, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Happy to move that the minutes of the Engineering Works Committee meeting held on Monday, the 11th of December 2017 at 6:11 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak to that, Councillor Glacken?
No.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Matters arising from those minutes? No. Reports, EWC 6, reports and minutes of committees and working parties. Happy to accept, if you like, both items in the one motion. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair, through you to move both.
Thank you.
If I may, noting my appreciation for you chairing the Albury Airport Users Advisory Committee meeting on my behalf as well.
Okay, might need to read the full contents.
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Glacken.
No, that's all right. To move both sets of minutes, so EWC 6.1, minutes of Hume Zone Bushfire Management Committee meeting held on the 14th of November 2017, and EWC 6.2, minutes of the Albury Airport Users Advisory Committee meeting held on the 6th of December 2017. Mr Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thurley again.
Second the motion, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak to that, Councillor Glacken?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. We don't have any officers' reports for consideration. Officers' reports for noting. EWC 8.1, 2017-18 Works Program Status Report, December quarter. Come on, don't be shy. Councillor Mack.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm happy to move the recommendation that the committee recommends to Council that report on the status of this 2017-18 Works Program as of at 31 December 2017 be received and noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
I'm not shy, then I will second the motion.
Thank you,
Chair.
Councillor Doxey. Councillor Mack, would you like to speak to the motion, please? Councillor Con, you've pushed your yes button. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Very briefly, thank you, Mr. Chair. If only to express my great enthusiasm to see the flurry of footpath and bike path building as we get from 25% to 100% over the rest of the year.
Thank you. I'd like to note that, obviously we're making progress on our status report, a little bit down on where perhaps we would like to be, but it's pretty good. So congratulations to staff for getting there and keep up the good work. Make sure that we get to 100% by the end of June. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. We don't have any other items of business, no delegates' reports for noting, no notice of urgent business, no confidential matters, so I declare the meeting closed at 6:50 p.m.